Thomas Reeves rubbed his tired eyes as he reviewed his field notes one final time before bed. After 6 months on Varia, he still found the longer rotation of the planet disorienting. The soft blue glow of the planet's 3 moons filtered through his window, casting long shadows across his quarters at the Interspecies Research Center. As Earth's leading xenobiologist and the first human granted extended residency on Varia, Thomas took his documentation responsibilities seriously. Today had been particularly exhausting. He'd spent 14 hours observing the intricate social hierarchies of the Varian scientific community. Their tall, slender forms moved with a grace that still fascinated him, their iridescent skin shifting colors subtly with their emotions. Thomas closed his journal and placed it on the nightstand. The accommodations provided by his hosts were comfortable, if strange. The bed, more of a cushioned platform really, conformed to his body in a way that human-made mattresses never could. He had just drifted into that pleasant space between wakefulness and sleep when a soft sound jolted him back to consciousness. The door to his quarters slid open silently. Thomas sat upright, his heart hammering against his ribs. A silhouette stood in the doorway, backlit by the corridor's ambient lighting. "Who's there?" Thomas called out, reaching for the communication device on his nightstand. The figure stepped forward, and the room's sensors detected movement, increasing the illumination slightly. It was Nairi, one of the junior researchers assigned to the exchange program. Her skin, normally a calm blue-green, rippled with anxious patterns of violet and silver. "Scholar Reeves," she addressed him with the formal title the Varians had assigned him. "I apologize for the intrusion during your rest cycle." Thomas relaxed slightly, but confusion replaced his initial alarm. "Is something wrong? Has there been an emergency?" He glanced at his communication device, but there were no alerts. Nairi stepped further into the room, her large, multifaceted eyes reflecting the moonlight. "No emergency of the nature you might expect," she said, her translator converting her melodic language into English. "I have a request that may seem unusual to you." Thomas swung his legs over the side of the bed, grateful he'd worn the loose-fitting sleep clothes provided by the center. "What kind of request?" Nairi's skin pulsed briefly with embarrassment, a flash of pink that Thomas had learned to recognize. "I wish to rest beside you. To share sleeping proximity." Thomas blinked, certain he'd misunderstood or the translator had malfunctioned. "You want to sleep here? With me?" "Yes." Nairi's posture straightened, her 7-fingered hands clasped in front of her in the Varian gesture of formal request. "It is not what your human customs might suggest. Our species does not mate in the manner yours does." Thomas felt his face grow warm. "I didn't assume that, but the celestial alignment tonight brings difficulties for my kind," Nairi continued. "Proximity to others during rest provides security. Usually, we would seek family members, but I have none at the research center." Thomas studied her, noting the unusual vibration in her slender frame, a sign of stress he documented in his research. "And the other Varians?" "All paired for security already," she explained. "I was working late and—" She paused, her skin darkening with what Thomas recognized as reluctance. "The truth is, Scholar Reeves, I find your presence stabilizing. Your biorhythms have a calming effect on our sensory perception." Thomas considered this information. Nothing in his research had prepared him for this scenario, and he was acutely aware that his response could have diplomatic implications. "Would it help if I explained more about this custom?" Nairi offered, sensing his hesitation. "Yes," Thomas said, gesturing to the chair near his desk. "Please do." As Nairi began to speak, Thomas realized that this unexpected encounter might provide exactly the kind of cultural insight he had come to Varia to discover, even if it came at the cost of a good night's sleep. "Your confusion is understandable," Nairi said, perching on the edge of the chair. Her movements were fluid yet precise, reminding Thomas of a praying mantis. Let me explain our ways more clearly. Thomas settled back against the wall, creating a respectful distance between them. Please do. I want to understand. Nairi's skin shifted to a calmer blue as she gathered her thoughts. Varians are empathically sensitive to celestial alignments. Tonight, our three moons form what you might call a trinity conjunction. This rare phenomenon creates resonance patterns that disturb our neurological systems. Thomas nodded slowly. Like electromagnetic interference? Similar, but affecting our biological rhythms rather than technology. Her eyes blinked in their distinctive sideways pattern. During such events, we seek proximity to others. The combined biorhythms create a stabilizing effect, a counterbalance to the disruption. Thomas glanced toward his window, where the three moons hung in perfect alignment. I had no idea the moons affected your species so directly. It is not something we often discuss with outsiders. Nairi's skin rippled with small pulses of yellow, a sign of vulnerability Thomas had rarely observed. In our history, predator species exploited this knowledge during alignments. Thomas felt a surge of sympathy. And this proximity, it's purely for physiological stability? Yes. Among my people, this is no more intimate than. She paused, searching for a human equivalent. Perhaps like your concept of roommates during a storm? There is comfort in not being alone when external forces threaten stability. Thomas considered this. His xenobiology training had emphasized the importance of respecting alien cultural norms without imposing human perspectives. Still, he couldn't help feeling awkward about the situation. Among humans, he explained carefully, sharing sleeping space is usually reserved for family members, children, or romantic partners. Nairi's skin flashed with understanding. Ah. This explains your hesitation. Among Varians, romantic bonding involves a complex biochemical process quite different from simple proximity. She tilted her head curiously. Do humans truly assign such significance to mere physical closeness? Thomas smiled despite himself. We do, though it varies by culture. We're a very touch-oriented species in some ways. Fascinating, Nairi responded, her scientist's curiosity momentarily overriding her discomfort. I have observed this in the research center, how humans touch shoulders or shake hands. We assumed these were formal rituals, not comfort behaviors. For several minutes, they continued this exchange of cultural observations, and Thomas found himself relaxing. This was exactly the kind of cross-species understanding the exchange program was designed to foster. The alignment will peak in approximately 2 hours, Nairi finally said, her skin now showing faint traces of distress again. Its effects are beginning to intensify. Thomas noticed a subtle tremor in her slender frame. Scientific curiosity and human compassion warred briefly in his mind before compassion won out. I don't fully understand your experience, he said carefully, but I wouldn't want you to suffer unnecessarily. If my presence helps stabilize your condition, then you're welcome to stay. Relief washed across Nairi's features, her skin brightening to a peaceful aquamarine. Thank you, Scholar Reeves. Your understanding honors the spirit of our exchange program. Thomas moved to the far side of the sleeping platform, creating a respectful boundary. I'll stay on this side. Will that provide sufficient proximity for the stabilizing effect you need? Nairi nodded, settling herself on the opposite edge of the platform with precise movements. This distance is appropriate. The effect works within a radius of approximately 1 meter. The situation still felt strange to Thomas, but he was determined to be a good ambassador for humanity. As he lay back down, he couldn't help but observe how alien Nairi's resting posture was, her limbs arranged in a configuration no human could achieve, her breathing shallow and rhythmic. May I ask a personal question? He ventured after a few minutes of silence. Of course, came her soft reply. Why did you choose my quarters specifically? Surely there are other Varians whose biorhythms would be compatible. There was a long pause before Nairi responded, her voice quieter than before. Your biorhythms are unique. Humans have a different resonance pattern than Varians, slower, steadier. During my analysis of comparative physiology, I noticed that your particular pattern creates a harmonic cancellation effect against the lunar disturbance. Thomas processed this. So I'm basically acting as a white noise machine for your nervous system? A small sound emerged from Nairi that his translator didn't catch, but Thomas recognized it as the Varian equivalent of laughter. A crude but not inaccurate comparison. As they lay in silence, Thomas found himself gaining a new perspective on his mission. Beyond the formal scientific observations and diplomatic exchanges, these unexpected cultural intersections might be the true value of his time on Varia. Rest well, Nairi, he said softly. And you as well, Thomas Reeves, she replied, using his personal name for the first time. Outside, the three moons of Varia continued their silent alignment, bathing the research center in their ethereal blue light. Two beings from distant worlds lay in the darkness, separated by biology and culture, yet connected by something as universal as the need for safety during times of vulnerability. Morning arrived with the gradual brightening of Varia's silver-tinged sun. Thomas woke to find himself alone on the sleeping platform, with only a small data tablet placed carefully on the adjacent surface indicating Nairi had been there at all. The screen illuminated as he picked it up, displaying a message in both Varian script and translated English. Scholar Reeves, my sincere gratitude for your accommodation during the celestial event. Your assistance proved most stabilizing. I have returned to my laboratory duties. Nairi, Biological Sciences Division. Thomas smiled at the formal tone, so typically Varian in its precise politeness. He dressed quickly in his regulation exchange program uniform, wondering how to approach their next interaction. Would Nairi prefer to pretend nothing unusual had occurred? Human social awkwardness existed across galaxies, it seemed. The research center's common area buzzed with activity as Thomas entered. Various Varian researchers moved purposefully between workstations, their skin tones collectively calmer than the previous day. The alignment's effects had apparently passed. Several acknowledged Thomas with the characteristic head tilt of respect, but he didn't spot Nairi among them. Scholar Reeves, a deep voice addressed him. Thomas turned to find Director Kalin, the senior Varian scientist overseeing the exchange program. I trust you found the alignment phenomenon interesting from an observational perspective? Thomas maintained a neutral expression, uncertain how much Kalin knew about Nairi's visit. Quite fascinating. I noticed some behavioral changes among the research staff. Kalin's skin rippled with amusement. Indeed. I understand researcher Nairi sought your assistance with the stabilization process. Thomas felt heat rise to his face. She explained the cultural context. I was happy to help. Your adaptability honors you, Kalin said with approval. Many Outworlders would misinterpret our needs during alignment. Nairi spoke highly of your understanding when she filed her morning report. Thomas blinked in surprise. She filed a report? Standard procedure during alignment events, Kalin explained. All temporary stabilization pairings are documented for research purposes. Nothing to concern yourself with. With a formal gesture of dismissal, Kalin moved away, leaving Thomas wondering just how routine last night's events had actually been. He made his way to the nutrition center, his mind filled with new questions about Varian social structures. He spotted Nairi later that afternoon in the xenobotany lab, carefully analyzing samples of Earth plant life that had been introduced to Varian soil. Her slender fingers manipulated delicate instruments with remarkable precision as she measured growth patterns. Researcher Nairi, Thomas greeted her, using her formal title. She looked up, her skin briefly pulsing with recognition before settling into a professional blue-green hue. Scholar Reeves. Your timing is fortuitous. I've encountered anomalies in the Terran specimens that might interest you. Thomas appreciated her seamless pivot to scientific matters. Moving closer to her workstation, he examined the data displays. The nitrogen fixation is occurring at 3 times Earth's standard rate. Precisely, Nairi confirmed. It suggests Varian soil bacteria have formed a symbiotic relationship with Earth plant structures far more quickly than our models predicted. For the next several hours, they worked side by side, analyzing the unexpected symbiosis. The previous night's unusual circumstances faded into the background as they fell into the comfortable rhythm of scientific collaboration. Thomas found himself impressed by Nairi's methodical approach and insightful observations. These results could have significant implications for future agricultural exchanges, Nairi noted as they compiled their findings. Thomas nodded. It demonstrates compatibility nobody anticipated. Life finds ways to connect, even across star systems. Nairi's skin briefly flickered with a complex pattern Thomas couldn't interpret. An astute observation. Perhaps there are more areas of compatibility between our species than currently documented. As their work session concluded, Thomas found himself reluctant to end their interaction. Would you be interested in continuing this discussion over the evening meal? I'd like to hear more about your previous research. Nairi's large eyes studied him with scientific curiosity. That would be acceptable. The Nutrition Center serves both our dietary requirements during the 3rd rotation period. Over their respective meals, Thomas with synthesized Earth proteins and Nairi with Varian mineral-rich vegetation, their conversation gradually shifted from purely scientific matters to more personal exchange. How did you become interested in xenobiology? Nairi asked, consuming a crystalline substance that Thomas knew contained essential trace elements for Varians. I grew up near an ecological preserve on Earth, Thomas explained. Studying the interconnectedness of different species fascinated me. When interstellar contact was established, applying those same principles to entirely different evolutionary paths seemed like the ultimate scientific frontier. Nairi's skin rippled with understanding. My path was similar. I specialized in adaptive biological systems after studying the varied evolution on Varia's archipelago regions. The possibility of examining life from another world became my primary motivation. As they talked, Thomas noticed other Varians occasionally glancing their way with what appeared to be curiosity. He wondered if sharing a meal carried different cultural significance than he realized. Have I inadvertently crossed another cultural boundary by inviting you to dine together? He asked quietly. Nairi's skin flashed briefly with amusement. Not inappropriate, merely uncommon. Varians typically consume nutrients in functional groups rather than social pairings. Your invitation suggests an Earth cultural approach to relationship building. Is that problematic? Thomas asked, suddenly concerned. Not at all, Nairi assured him. The exchange program encourages such cultural blending. In fact, she hesitated before continuing, I find your human approaches to connection intriguing. The emphasis on face-to-face interaction during nutrient consumption is surprisingly effective for information exchange. As they parted ways that evening, Thomas felt the foundations of a genuine cross-species friendship forming. What had begun as an awkward nocturnal encounter was evolving into something scientifically valuable, a true cultural exchange. Until tomorrow, researcher Nairi, Thomas said as they reached the junction where their residential corridors diverged. Until tomorrow, Thomas, she replied, using his personal name again. Her skin glowed with a warm amber hue he hadn't observed before as she added, thank you for your adaptability. It is most appreciated. As Thomas returned to his quarters, he made detailed notes about their interactions, professionally documenting each new insight about Varian social customs. Yet privately, he found himself looking forward to their next encounter with an enthusiasm that went beyond scientific curiosity. 3 days after the lunar alignment, Thomas stood on the research center's observation deck, staring at the approaching atmospheric disturbance with growing concern. What had begun as a routine stellar fluctuation had rapidly evolved into something far more threatening. The nearby star Varia orbited was exhibiting unprecedented coronal activity. The particle emissions will reach us within 6 hours, senior meteorological researcher Thavo announced to the assembled team. His normally calm blue skin had darkened to an anxious indigo. All non-essential personnel should relocate to the shielded central chambers immediately. The room filled with the musical tones of Varian concerned communication as researchers began organizing their emergency protocols. Thomas caught Nairi's eye across the room where she was rapidly storing sensitive biological samples in protective containers. Scholar Reeves, Director Kalin approached him. Your physiology has not been tested against this level of stellar radiation. I strongly recommend you join the first evacuation group. Thomas shook his head. With respect, Director, I'd like to assist with securing the research materials first. The xenobotany lab contains irreplaceable Earth specimens. Kalen's skin pulsed with reluctant approval. Very well. Researcher Nairi can coordinate with you, but proceed quickly. The radiation shield will be at maximum capacity once the leading edge of the stellar event arrives. As the observation deck cleared, Thomas made his way to Nairi's side. Need help with those samples? Your assistance would be most welcome, she replied, her movements more hurried than her typically precise gestures. These Earth-Varian hybrid cultures are particularly sensitive to radiation. If they're compromised, we lose 6 months of integration data. Together they rushed toward the xenobotany laboratory, joining the organized chaos of researchers preserving their work. Through the vast windows lining the corridors, Thomas could see the sky taking on an ominous crimson hue as the stellar event began affecting Varia's upper atmosphere. We've never recorded a solar storm of this magnitude, Nairi explained as they carefully packed specialized containment units. Our star has been stable for recorded history, this behavior is unprecedented. Thomas helped her seal a particularly delicate sample. Could it be related to the lunar alignment from earlier this week? Nairi's skin flickered thoughtfully. An intriguing hypothesis. The gravitational interactions could have triggered previously dormant solar dynamics. She paused, looking at him with newfound respect. Few off-worlders would make that connection. A deep rumbling vibration passed through the research center, followed by a momentary flickering of the illumination systems. An automated voice began announcing in both Varian and English, radiation shield deployment commencing. All personnel must reach central chambers within 30 minutes. Exterior sectors will be sealed in 25 minutes. We need to hurry, Thomas said, securing the last container. As they turned to leave, a louder, more violent tremor shook the laboratory. Equipment crashed to the floor, and Thomas instinctively reached out to steady Nairi as she lost her balance. The moment his hand touched her arm, her skin flashed with a bright pulse that spread outward from the point of contact. Are you all right? He asked, withdrawing his hand quickly, uncertain if he'd hurt her. Yes, she replied, her voice slightly modulated. Human touch generates a stronger bioelectric response than I anticipated. Before Thomas could respond, a third tremor, stronger than the previous ones, reverberated through the structure. The laboratory door slammed shut with a pneumatic hiss, and emergency containment protocols activated. Exterior containment initiated in sectors 7 through 12 due to structural integrity concerns, the automated system announced. Please remain in place until safety teams can extract you. Thomas felt his heart rate accelerate. That's us, isn't it? Sector 9? Nairi moved to the laboratory's control terminal, her fingers working rapidly across the interface. Confirmed. The system has detected potential atmospheric leakage in our section and sealed us in protectively. Her skin darkened with concern. The radiation shield coverage in this sector will be limited once the full storm arrives. Thomas assessed their situation quickly. How long before extraction teams can reach us? Uncertain. Priority will be given to areas with largest personnel concentrations, Nairi replied. We may need to create our own solution. For the next hour, they worked methodically to reinforce their position, moving sensitive equipment away from exterior walls and constructing a makeshift radiation barrier using lead-lined experimental containers. Through the laboratory windows, they watched as the sky transformed completely, swirling with violent electromagnetic patterns that turned day into an eerie twilight. The primary wave is approaching, Nairi observed, examining the environmental monitors. Our barrier should provide adequate protection, but what? Thomas asked, noting her hesitation. Varians experience neurological disruption during intense stellar events, similar to the lunar alignment but significantly more severe. Her skin rippled with reluctant vulnerability. I may become incapacitated temporarily. Thomas moved closer to her. Tell me how I can help. Physical proximity would help stabilize the effect, as before, she explained. However, the intensity required would be greater. Direct contact might be necessary. Thomas nodded without hesitation. Whatever you need. We're in this together. The first wave of the stellar storm hit with blinding intensity. The laboratory windows automatically darkened to their maximum opacity, but still the room filled with an unnatural light. Nairi immediately stiffened, her skin paling to an alarming white as her limbs began to tremble. Thomas moved quickly, guiding her to their sheltered area. I've got you, he said, allowing her to lean against him as they huddled behind their makeshift barrier. Your biorhythms, she managed to say through her distress. Need closer alignment. Understanding her need, Thomas wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer. The effect was immediate, her trembling subsided, and color slowly returned to her skin, though it pulsed with unusual patterns Thomas had never observed before. Better? He asked softly. Yes, she replied, her voice steadier. Your species' electromagnetic field has a dampening effect on the stellar interference. Fascinating, even in these circumstances. Despite the danger of their situation, Thomas found himself smiling. Only you would be conducting scientific observations while trapped in a radiation storm. As are you, she pointed out, her large eyes focusing on him with surprising warmth. We are both scientists, after all. For hours they remained huddled together as the storm raged outside. The research center's structure groaned under the assault of radiation and atmospheric disturbance, but their immediate area remained secure. They talked to pass the time, about their respective worlds, their research, and the unexpected ways their lives had led them to this precise moment, sheltering together on an alien world. If we survive this, Thomas said during a momentary lull in the storm, I think we'll have enough data for several interesting papers on human-Varian biological compatibility. Nairi's skin flashed with what Thomas now recognized as her version of laughter. Indeed. Though I suspect some of our findings might be too personal for formal publication. As night fell and the worst of the storm began to pass, Thomas realized how comfortable their proximity had become. The initial awkwardness of cross-species contact had given way to something that felt remarkably natural, two intelligent beings finding connection despite their differences. Extraction team approaching Sector 9, the system finally announced. Prepare for emergency evacuation. As they gathered themselves to meet their rescuers, Nairi placed one seven-fingered hand gently on Thomas's arm, her skin glowing with a deep, resonant blue he'd never seen before. Thank you, Thomas, she said simply. Your presence did more than stabilize my neurological responses. It provided comfort. Thomas covered her hand with his own, no longer concerned about the bioelectric response his touch triggered. That's what friends do, he said, then added with a smile, even when they're from different stars. The research center hummed with renewed activity in the days following the stellar storm. Repair crews worked diligently to restore damaged sections while scientists assessed the impact on their various projects. For Thomas, the aftermath brought unexpected attention. He had become something of a curiosity among the Varian community. The human who sheltered with researcher Nairi, they would say as he passed, their skin rippling with colors that his translator couldn't quite interpret but that seemed respectful. News of how they had weathered the storm together had spread quickly through the center's communication networks. Thomas found himself in Director Kalen's office one morning, facing not only the director but a panel of senior Varian officials whose formal attire indicated their high status. Scholar Reeves, Director Kalen began, these representatives from the Varian Science Council have requested your presence to discuss the recent events. Thomas straightened in his chair, acutely aware that this meeting could have significant implications for the exchange program. I'm honored to meet with the council. The eldest of the Varian officials, her skin a deep, wise purple with intricate patterns that denoted decades of experience, addressed him directly. Your actions during the stellar event have provided valuable insights into human Varian biocompatibility. Most notably, your physiological stabilizing effect on researcher Nairi during extreme conditions. Thomas nodded carefully. I was simply helping a colleague in danger. Yet in doing so, another official observed, you demonstrated an unprecedented level of adaptive compatibility. Our species have different evolutionary paths, different biological structures, yet in crisis, you functioned as an effective stabilization partner. The senior official's skin shifted to a formal shade of blue. The Council proposes extending your research mission by an additional Earth year. We believe further study of these unexpected compatibilities could benefit both our worlds. Thomas felt a mix of surprise and pleasure at the offer. I would be honored to extend my stay, though I'd need to consult with my Earth supervisors. They have already been contacted, Director Kalen informed him. They share our enthusiasm for this research direction. As the meeting concluded, Thomas found himself walking through the botanical gardens where damaged specimens were being carefully tended back to health. He spotted Nairi kneeling beside a section of earth plants, measuring their recovery rates with meticulous attention. I hear congratulations are in order, she said without looking up as he approached, her keen senses having detected his presence. The Council rarely extends personal invitations to offworlders. Thomas crouched beside her, examining the resilient earth flora that had survived the radiation exposure. I've accepted their offer to extend my mission. Now Nairi did look up, her skin briefly flashing with a bright pulse that Thomas had come to recognize as pleasure. A wise decision. Our research on biological compatibility has barely begun. Is that what we're calling it now? Thomas asked with a smile. Biological compatibility research? Nairi's skin rippled with amusement. Would you prefer cross-species stabilization studies or perhaps xenobiological harmonic integration? Thomas laughed. How about we just call it friendship? Friendship, Nairi repeated the word thoughtfully. A human concept with no direct Varian equivalent, yet I find it surprisingly adequate. They worked side by side through the afternoon, restoring the garden that represented the physical manifestation of their world's connection. As Varia's sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the research center, Thomas realized how dramatically his perspective had shifted since that first night when Nairi had appeared unexpectedly at his door. There's a delegation leaving for Earth next month, Thomas mentioned as they finished their work. A cultural exchange visit. Would you consider joining them? I could arrange it through my contacts. Nairi paused, her hands deep in the soil where she was replanting a particularly resilient specimen. You wish me to visit your world? I think you'd find it fascinating, Thomas said. And it would create a more balanced exchange. I've learned so much about Varia, perhaps it's time you experienced Earth firsthand. Nairi's skin cycled through a complex series of colors before settling on a determined blue-green. I would need to prepare extensively. Earth's atmospheric composition, gravity, social protocols. I'd help you prepare, Thomas assured her. The same way you've helped me adapt to Varia. Later that evening, they stood together on the newly repaired observation deck, watching as the 3 moons of Varia rose in sequence. No longer aligned as they had been during that fateful night, they now occupied different quadrants of the sky, each casting its distinctive light across the landscape. Before coming to Varia, I imagined alien worlds would be completely foreign, utterly incomprehensible to human understanding, Thomas reflected. I never expected to find so many connections. Perhaps that is the true discovery of interstellar contact, Nairi suggested, her voice soft. Not how different we are, but how similar we can be despite those differences. Thomas nodded, watching as Nairi's skin shifted to a peaceful, luminescent blue that seemed to mirror the moonlight. In the 6 months since his arrival, he had filled countless research journals with observations about Varian biology, culture, and society. But the most profound discovery, that beings from different worlds could form meaningful connections despite their differences, was one he had never anticipated. When we first met, Thomas said, when you came to my quarters that night during the alignment, did you ever imagine we'd end up here? Nairi turned her multifaceted eyes toward him, her skin pulsing with warm amber tones that he now recognized as affection. I sought only neurological stabilization from a compatible biological entity, she said with the subtle humor he had come to appreciate. I found instead a partner in discovery. Is that what I am? Thomas asked with a smile. A partner in discovery? Among my people, there is a concept called Kithri, those who walk different paths but see the same stars, Nairi explained. It is rare enough between Varians, rarer still across species. Yet here we stand. As Varia's moons continued their ancient paths across the alien sky, Thomas and Nairi stood side by side, their shadows emerging on the deck beneath them, 2 beings from distant worlds, fundamentally different yet undeniably connected. Whatever the next Earth year would bring, they would face it together, expanding the boundaries of both their sciences and their understanding of what connection could mean across the stars. Thomas looked toward the distant point of light that was Sol, barely visible in Varia's night sky, a humbling reminder of how far he had traveled and how much farther there was still to go. Different paths, he said softly, same stars. Yes, Nairi agreed, her voice carrying the musical lilt of her native language beneath the translation. Different paths, same stars.